topic of the Economic Association of Namibia's conference for 2016 is the Namibian economy, past, present and future. Rather than preparing or getting another speaker in to give a long talk about where Namibia has come from, we thought it would be a nice change of pace to have a discussion around this topic with a few people from the Economic Association's board and the director of the association. So we're just going to talk informally about what we've seen happening in the Namibian economy since independence in 1990. We can just start with Klaus. What do you think? What's the greatest success that we've seen?
Greatest, I think we have seen successes. We often look at the macro data and complain that there is not much shift from primary to secondary industries but on a more meso or micro level, I think we have seen a diversification in agriculture, for instance, diversification even in mining. Uranium mining is coming up very strongly once probably the global environment improves and TUSAP comes on stream. Uranium has the potential to be or even exceeding diamonds as the most important mineral export earner. Agriculture, we have seen a strong increase in horticultural production. In 1990 was probably virtually nothing, and this now we cover about 40% of domestic demand. Grapes is a success story from almost zero at independence to now, I think, more than 20,000 tons and exceeding beef exports. And so
the value of grape exports is quite a bit above beef exports now, and especially now in these sorts of drought years, you have much better production from grapes than you have from beef.
Yes, and I think what is important is that we look in what created these successes. What were the underlying, let's say, policies or so that pushed these industries forward, and can we apply it to some other industries? We have seen diversification also in the manufacturing sector. Much more of our minerals are processed or more processed than they were before. We had quite some diamond cutting and then polishing companies. They faced stiff headwinds and some of them closed down. But still there is a diversification going on. Cement plant and the backward and forward linkages of these, for instance, Orongo sources all minerals and inputs in Namibia, from gypsum to iron to even part of their fuel is based on our biomass now. And due to Orongo, we have a sleeper factory in Tsumeb using the produce of Orongo to produce sleepers for the railway industries and so on and so forth. So
you get a lot of these sort of multiplier effects as a result of some of this industry starting, and particularly in that manufacturing space that you're talking about with Orongo.
Absolutely, and as I said, let's analyze it and see what we can learn for other industries, how we can link other industries more strongly with each other and to the primary or even also tertiary sectors.
So Namibia's GDP per capita has increased by roughly 70% since independence. So the average GDP, or the GDP per person in the country, has increased by roughly 70% since independence. But the actual size of the economy in inflation-adjusted terms has more than tripled since independence. So I mean, obviously that shows that things have been moving forward. We have this perception that we have this jobless growth, and it's just not the case. I mean, our economy definitely does need a lot more jobs to be created, but we've also created well over 300,000 jobs since independence. I think we had about 380,000 jobs at independence. Now we're well over 700,000 jobs as well. So I think that's it's a huge success for an economy like ours to go and create all of those jobs. Now that's not to say that there aren't challenges still, but certainly we have made quite a lot of progress in that space. I think something that's also interesting, and particularly probably as a result of all of this job creation that we spoke about, is that we've seen major improvements in equality as well. That's not to say we don't still have challenges, and we are still a very unequal society, but we have seen enormous progress there, and I think that that's very much driven by the growth that we've seen in the middle class through some of that job creation that we speak about.
But when we are looking at the equality, we must also look at the pace or the time that coming from independence since after 26 years, and still we have a minimum reduction of inequality in the country. So that is something that where maybe most of the policies has to be addressed to.
Yeah, I think that's very true. I mean, we haven't made as much progress as we would like to, but the point is, I think that we are moving forward. Something that's interesting, just a number on this, is that the 20%, the poorest 20% of households in Namibia at independence had an average income of roughly 150 US dollars a year. Now that's increased to well over 1,200 US dollars a year. So we're talking there about that poorest 20% household income doubling again, and then doubling again since independence. So we definitely have made progress, particularly in that lower income group. Of course, it's not to say that we've done enough, and we do still have far too much poverty, and we do still have far too high levels of inequality. But I think the point is that we are definitely making progress.
One of the things that I thought was quite interesting just on this topic is I think the whole world has actually moved in a much more unequal direction. I'm just basing this now on one of the talks that Joseph Stiglitz gave earlier in the year here at UNAM, and he actually said from all the data that he'd seen, only 8 countries in the world had actually improved their Gini coefficient in the last 10 years, Namibia being one of them. And it's actually quite interesting. Just as another example, is much of the Western world, with the exception, I think, of like France and a few European states, had actually gotten a lot worse with inequality. So I think it's something that one should also be aware of, is that even though the global trend has been very much towards inequality, Namibia has done quite a fair fight against it, not removing it at all from the plight of a lot of the people that have struggled for 26 years to actually improve their lot. But I think Namibia in the global economy has actually done quite all right in that.
Housing, I think housing is it's a controversial topic for sure, and I think it is a big challenge for Namibia still. If you take Windhoek, for example, roughly 40% of the Windhoek population lives in informal housing, and this is obviously something that we have to change. But I think what we have seen, perhaps over the past 2 years or so, has been a bit of a renewed effort towards housing. And I mean, in my mind, the solution is relatively simple. I think, as we spoke about with the conservancies, people are very able to help themselves if you create the right environment for them to do so. The idea that we need a government to build everybody houses, I think, is incorrect. I think that there are some people who will definitely need government support to get access to housing. Those are your very low income people. But I think that there's large numbers of Namibians that can actually afford to build themselves their own house if they can get access to service land. So I'm a big proponent of trying to increase the availability of service land, and I personally believe that if we were to make significantly more service land available and actually fund it through the budget, it would be a very good way of helping to reduce inequality, helping to reduce intergenerational poverty, whereby people can take a piece of land that they've received from government for free, funded by the taxpayer. So it's a redistribution from your more wealthy taxpayers to your less wealthy people. Piece of land for free, service land, and then slowly build a house on it. And I think that creates an opportunity for all Namibians to be involved in the process of sorting out our housing problem. As well as that, people can build a house, as and when they have surplus funds. They can get a bank loan to assist them doing that, and you can slowly over time develop your property, which you can then pass on to your children. As well as that, you have access to electricity, you have access to water, you have access to toilets and so on. And I think all of that enormous additional benefits to society. And if you look at the cost of doing this, I mean, a rough estimation of the cost of giving every single Namibian household a free piece of service land would be something in the region of 10 billion Namibia dollars. It's definitely not an impossibility.
The issue here is a short supply of housing that is being chased by a large number of people. So, and then that scaled up the housing prices. So maybe a workability of affordability should be done in terms of housing.
No, I agree. That definitely has to happen. But I think in terms of a long-term sustainability thing, it comes down to, once again, the servicing. Because I don't think people are struggling to build the structures. It's about getting a piece of land where there is a sewer connected, where there is water connected, where there is a road, there's a bus stop nearby, that they know that if I have just $10 extra this month, I can buy 3 bricks and I can save it. And I can slowly build up and build myself a house on this piece of land. The current situation, because it's informal, I've got a tiny little piece of land somewhere on the side of a hill, and there's no reason for me to really invest in this land because it's not mine.
No tenure and it's not serviced.
But I think the most thing that has escalated the servicing prices is the demand. So when people are servicing the land and they have seen that 20 people want one piece of land, so they have to escalate the price of housing. So the servicing part of itself is led by the demand and basic economics.
But
the supply is limited because
it's an island.
Because, I don't agree with that. The supply is limited because we have a monopoly over servicing land inventory. That's my controversial statement for the day. But I mean, that is what's holding it back. If we had more people able to service land, we would have more service land available. This demand-supply imbalance would relatively quickly be addressed. But I think it comes back to Klaus's point as well, that it's not necessarily the best approach to try to service huge areas of land, but perhaps to make more efficient use of the land that is available. Namibia is ranked 17th globally in terms of media press freedom. And I think if you look at some of the headlines that we see in the media, I think that we're trying to test how free our media is at times. And I mean, it's been a huge success. I think it's really something that's worth putting a big tick mark next to the fact that we don't always agree with everything we see in the media. It is sometimes controversial. It is sometimes unpopular, and often unpopular with right up to the highest office in the land. And yet we remain with a very, very free media. I think that's a huge success.
But also in terms of pushing the economy further, and so you need to have an open and innovative, creative society. You can't create that by restricting media and reports. We need to have this public exchange of ideas, and also holding office bearers to account is necessary for the efficient running of offices and the economy.
For good governance, I think freedom of or press freedom it's more relevant, because all the policies and all other policies that are aimed at developing the countries are being expressed and criticized in a manner that helps the country. So it says your unhappy customers are always the good people. So if you hear somebody criticizing a certain policy and all that, there is a need for improvement, and that will improve the governance.
Something that I think is quite interesting in that regard as well is that my view, at least, is that the average Namibian is pretty engaged. That's the feeling I get, that most Namibians are pretty engaged in what's going on in the country. They know about the national plans. They often know quite a lot of detail on the national plans. They know what's happening, who's doing what, who's saying what, and so on. And I think that's also very important. And there's a lot of private discussions, I'm sure, that go on about the things that people read in the media, about the things they see in the press.